Hi friends, I'm Marcus Lapp here with SpeakYourMindMethod.com, which I happen to be the founder of. I'm also a speech coach and a former stutterer. So as anybody who has ever stuttered will tell you, it's exhausting, it's painful, and sometimes even it borders on the traumatic. And I've been there. I know what it's like to feel like a second-rate, incompetent, won't ever amount to anything human being because I have this thing, I can't even speak well in my own language. And I know what it's like to wake up in the morning and the very first feeling you feel is this monstrous pile of bricks that come crashing down on you, reminding you once more about this debilitating stutter that you carry around with you, that follows you everywhere you go, like a shadow that you just can't escape from. And yeah, I know what it's like to break down in tears in my bedroom and to just feel overwhelmed and to see no light at the end of this tunnel. And so today I want to be honest about the journey that I went through, the journey that brought me healing from stuttering in my own life, and also the same journey that I now help others traverse as well. And yes, we're talking about wounds here. And they're often deeply repressed wounds that expand so far, that go so deep into our psyche, that it's so much even beyond our conscious awareness in terms of how stuttering ends up affecting your life in all of these profound and intricate ways. So there's a lot of healing, there's a lot of awareness to build. And so this is not a quick fix, this is going to take time, but it's one of the more meaningful things you can do. That's true in my story. It's true of the clients, the people I talk to about this, about their struggle with stuttering. It's just one of the most meaningful things you could possibly do. And for that reason, I want to share what those steps are. What are those phases to healing those wounds that stuttering caused? So here are the 5 steps on this journey to fluency. I'll share them right off the top here, and then we'll dive into each individual step as we go. So step 1 is hope. Step 2 is doubt. Step 3 is perseverance. Step 4 is regression. And step 5 is renewal. So now let's go back to the beginning. Let's start at step 1. And let's figure out what this actually looks like. I'm going to try to paint this very clear picture for you so that you no longer feel trapped in this darkness, so that you can see just a little glimmer of light flickering in the distance. That is the point of this video. So let's jump right in. Step 1, hope. Hope is one of the most important things a human being can ever feel. And when it comes to stuttering, it feels like you've been walking in this desert for just years. You're dehydrated, you're hungry, and all of a sudden, what gives you hope? Maybe it's a video like this. Maybe it's a program. Maybe it's a coach. Maybe it's a book that you picked up. And all of a sudden, a little flickering light clicks on you like, oh, wait a second. This is what hope feels like. Maybe there's a chance. It's really powerful stuff. So it really is like you're just in this desert and all of a sudden you finally come across some water. You finally come across these green landscapes and there's food around and it's just such an exhilarating experience. And so step 1 here, it's hope. You're not going to get to the rest of these steps if you don't feel hope. In whatever shape and form that comes in, you gotta feel hope. And you gotta go look for hope if you don't have it. And I assume that's in part why you're watching this video. Another part of this hope phase that really, in terms of how we experience it, is I want to say a couple words about the placebo effect. Now, I was one of those people, as many of us have spent years probably. We're thinking of the placebo effect in completely the wrong way. And this was me for many, many years. I thought the placebo effect was just, oh, I take, a sugar pill and then I might still feel like it's a painkiller, but that's just my imagination. It's not really happening. But the studies on placebos have clearly shown that if you take a sugar pill that's a placebo and it's not a painkiller, it's very possible that you can experience the effect of what that painkiller would have given you because you believed it was a painkiller. That sugar pill, again, is not imaginative. It actually affects your neural circuitry in the same way that the real thing would have affected your neural circuitry. It turns on brain chemicals in very much the same way as the real thing would have turned on brain chemicals and released them to provide that what you experience as painkillers. That's the placebo effect. It's very real. It's an actual effect that your brain responds to as if you took the real thing. And this is why very often when people feel this hope and maybe they join a program or they join a stuttering community or they get a book or they get some coaching, that all of a sudden they see this spike. All of a sudden over the next week or so, they've got this euphoria. They're a bit lighter on their feet, and all of a sudden they can feel themselves being able to speak much better. That's because of the placebo effect. Now, the important part about that we also need to touch on is the roots, however, have not gone very deep yet. And that is then what leads us to step 2, which is the doubt phase or the doubt step. So you've had some hope, and now there's a glimmer of doubt that creeps in. So this is the reckoning phase or the recalibration phase, we could call it. And as I talked about, hope is imperative. You're not going to get your airplane off the ground if you don't go through the hope phase first. You need hope to drive you. You need that placebo experience to drive you. But what that also brings with it very often is its fair share of cognitive biases, right? And that's what then leads us to the doubt phase. So a couple of these biases we can quickly go over here is one bias is called the optimism bias, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. So when we are influenced by the optimism bias, what do? We underestimate obstacles in the future. We don't anticipate future setbacks. And an example of this that's very common is think of home renovation costs. So people who want to work on this big project in their home or they want to renovate. And almost always what happens, their initial price point is so much lower than what they end up spending because they didn't consider enough factors. They had this optimism bias of like, oh, if we just do this, it's only going to cost this much. That's great. And then what happens? It ends up costing way more. And this also happens if you're moving in, like moving in costs, right? Where it's like, oh, I pay the rent, the security deposit. Cool. It's like, and then all of a sudden you spend $10,000 by the time you got everything furnished out because you completely underestimated how much it was going to cost. You were just optimistic about the low cost of moving in to a new apartment or a new house or whatever. So this happens very often and happens in everything that we do almost. Every skill we learn, we go through some form of the optimism bias. And certainly that happens a lot in this stutter, in our experience of stuttering. Another bias is called the narrative fallacy. So what happens with the narrative fallacy is because of this hope that we've generated and that we're experiencing, we tell ourselves that, oh, we finally found this incredible, beautiful path of hope, of promise. And the evidence of that is, let's go back to that placebo effect, real neural change. Neural networks are starting to rewire. Real change. actual wins. You're actually speaking more fluently during the hope phase. And so you start to buy into this fallacy that it's going to continue just like that. It's going to continue in this linear arc. Your story is just going to beautifully you're just going to continue to grow in such a smooth trajectory. And an example for the narrative fallacy, it could easily be, if you went on a date and you went on 2 dates and it was magical and had this fairy tale, you had a fairy tale like experience and you're like, oh, this is going to keep going. You start to buy into the narrative of it's going to keep going just like this. It's only going to get better, right? I feel like especially the first time you fall in love, and that happened to me. The first time I fell in love, it was so amazing. And I legitimately thought, and we even talked about, I remember talking this, we both believed that it was only going to get better, and which is hilarious looking back on that. But it's the narrative fallacy, that we start to create this narrative of just smooth sailing, the growth we've made, we're going to continue to grow, and it's just going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome. And then you hit some doubt inevitably. So one more note on this doubt phase is I want to touch a little bit on this phenomenon that many people experience that you could call the phenomenon of things getting worse before they get better. Although I would add a little twist to that to make it a bit more accurate, because I actually think often what happens is things get better before they get worse before they get better. And that tracks with what I'm walking you through here, which is hope, things get better, but very quickly doubt creeps in, and then you go below baseline where things get worse before things eventually get better more sustainably. And that's a very real phenomenon. Many people experience it. And I usually like to describe this as the corollary or the outcome or the result of making the unconscious conscious. And there's, of course, that amazing Carl Jung quote of, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So this is the result of making the unconscious conscious, is things get worse before they get better. Why is that? Well, that's because you're paying attention to the mechanics of speaking, to your breathing, to, is my tongue relaxed? Am I tensing up? Am I, how am I approaching this from a mental standpoint? Am I visualizing right before I start to speak in a very stuttered, stressed out way? And then, of course, that's what comes out. And then you're trying to really gain an understanding. And then within all of that, to then insert, tools and insert these changes that you're trying to make through this process of making this unconscious pattern of stuttering that, again, it's just permeated a lot of your speech pathways. And you're then having to make that a conscious experience. And that's tiring and that's exhausting. And so that can very much or very often lead to this phenomenon of things getting worse before they get better. So if that happens to you, don't worry, it's completely normal. In some cases, even it's necessary, because we need to go through the conscious sphere in order to get that sustainable fluency that you are after. You're not going to get that by just addressing the unconscious. You need to make the unconscious conscious, and eventually, through that process, you can slowly fade your conscious fluency back into the unconscious to where you are no longer thinking about the mechanics and you can just speak and speak smoothly. But you first need to go through the conscious mind. So we got some hope. We experienced some doubt. Things weren't quite going the way that we had hoped. We realized we've bought into some biases, some fallacies. And then what do we do? What is the next step on this journey to healing? Well, it is perseverance. And James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits, has a really good analogy that I've used before to describe this kind of, or this part of the process, this perseverance step or phase. And that is where, if you imagine an ice cube that is in a freezer And the freezing point is, of course, 0 degrees Celsius. I'll be generous to all my non-American friends out there, and I'll switch from Fahrenheit to Celsius just because I love you guys, okay? So let's say that the freezer is at minus 10 degrees Celsius. You put the ice cube in there. Okay, it's not melting yet, of course. Well, okay, let's turn up the heat. Let's warm it up. So what happens? We go minus 9, minus 8, minus 7. What's happening? Anything happening yet? Has it started to melt? It's not as cold. No, it's exactly the same. Okay, that's weird. All right, minus 7, minus 6, minus 5, minus 4. Surely now, it's gotten like 7 degrees warmer since we started. And you look, it's like, nope, ice cube still frozen. Minus 3, minus 2, minus 1. Are you kidding me? It's still frozen? It's like, yeah, it's still frozen. But what happens when you go 0, 1, boom? You hit that critical threshold and the ice cube starts to melt. This is what James Clear calls the plateau of latent potential. It's like the roots of a tree or a plant, and everything's still underground. And it's growing, but you can't even tell when you're looking at it from the outside. But yet it's growing. And this is such an important part of this process, is persevering even when you don't see the clear-cut results, even when it just doesn't seem like it's quite working. You persevere anyway. You believe anyway. And what happens when you stick to that, when you commit, when you make your brain so alert and so keen to, oh, is this working? Is this kind of working? This might be working a little better. Okay. Like you're forcing yourself to pay attention. You're really forcing yourself to be diligent. You are putting in the effort. Now, one of the things that'll really help you with this is a turbocharge to this perseverance, is if you can make it really, really clear to you of what the future version of you would look like as a fluent speaker versus as a person who's still stuttering like you are now. If you have a very clear image in your mind, there's probably no better motivator than that. And I would say that's probably the best place to go to gain a little bit of that motivation, is to paint a very clear picture in your mind of, oh, if I persevere, if I really pull through this, if I really maximize my ability, whatever my max is, I'm going to become fluent. I'm going to be able to speak well. If you do that, what could your life look like a few years down the road? Versus if you don't persevere, what might that look like? And have those contrasting images in your head, vivid, so that the decision is very clear that, okay, I'm going to persevere. And this doesn't mean that you just blindly, keep practicing in the same way or keep doing the exact same thing. It might mean you need to open your eyes a bit, maybe look around a bit, take a step back, look at what your routine is, how you're practicing, what your approach is. Maybe you do need to change something. So I'm not talking about just head down, always working without paying attention. But perseverance, this is a must. If you want to be healed, if you want to experience that transformation, you are going to have to go through this perseverance phase. So what we have here is, again, hope, doubt, perseverance. And as you persevere, it starts to get better. You start to see your hard work pay off a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. It's a beautiful thing. Now, the next step is step 4, which is regression. So you've persevered, things are getting a bit better. You can sense, okay, things are starting to click. It's starting to feel a little bit like when I was in my early hope phase. But then what inevitably happens, you hit a bump in the road and you hit what I call a regression. Now, let's unpack this a little bit. It's simply true that after years of stuttering, the neural circuits responsible for those patterns, they don't just die out as soon as you start to speak a little bit better. They're still very much there. They're very much alive. And this is why, even after you feel even amazing progress, maybe a big spike in fluency, that it's still very likely that you're going to go sooner or later, you're going to reach this point where all of a sudden you start to regress and you start to snap back into those old grooves again of stuttering. This is kind of like when you miss your ex who you're still in love with and you're doing great, you're doing fine. Maybe it's a couple months after, right? But then all of a sudden you have a bad couple days and what happens? Oh, you start to miss her again. So your brain starts to snap back into those old grooves, right? And you're like, I have to reach out, I have to talk to her. And so what happens? Inevitably, it's late one night, you feel sad, and so you go and you text her a little message like, hey, are you up? Or whatever. You hit send, and then you realize that, oh yeah, she blocked me, so she's not even going to see the message. And then you just lay there, all sad and lonely. This is, of course, not a story that happened to me personally or anything. But moving on. Okay. So, but yes, that's kind of what it's like, right? Where we have these habits, we have these patterns that we've gotten so used to, that we've gotten comfortable with. And even if you don't feel emotionally that you've become comfortable with it, your brain certainly has become comfortable with those grooves of stuttering. And so that's what we experience. So that's regression. Those grooves, those old pathways, they don't just die away. They don't just disappear. They stick around. And it's very, very likely that you're going to go through, at different times, you're going to go through a phase like this where you regress, where you re-experience what it was like. Oh yeah, this is what it's like to feel kind of trapped a little bit in this stuttering mode. Now, one of the most fascinating things to me about the stuttering habit and the stuttering patterns is that they have this human-like personality to them. And here's what I mean. So these patterns, they're not just mechanical nuisances, like these inanimate machines that just do this and then you stutter and boom, like this. No, it's like they're actual forces with drive and hunger, and I would even say strategy. That's what I mean by they have this human-like personality in their little neural network that is the stuttering habit or the stuttering patterns. And I would even go so far as to say that these stuttering patterns have their own will to power, to use the old Nietzschean idea. What does that mean? Well, it's like a king who has been dethroned but hasn't died. And so what does that king do? Well, the king definitely misses his power. He wants to go back to the top. He wants to get back on the throne and retake the power that he lost. And so what does he do? He lurks in the shadows. He strategizes. He looks for possible ways in which he can sneak back in and take the power back. This is what habits are like. They're very much alive. They hate it when they lose power. This is why you feel so much resistance. Your stuttering habit hates it when it loses power. Your stuttering habit gets frustrated when it can't express itself in the same way anymore. Your stuttering habit craves attention. It craves validation. And I just think we need to think about it like that and interface with our stuttering habit in that way. Because when we start to view these stuttering patterns as actually intelligent, as actually smart, as actually power hungry, then it'll, maybe more than anything, we'll just actually understand for once why things are the way they are, why it's so hard to dethrone stuttering. And yeah, it's one of the most interesting, fascinating things to think about, to me at least, is thinking of will to power in the context of these stuttering patterns, these neural circuitries in the brain, that they have their own personalities. And we very much experience it that way. And so I think it is a very, very accurate way to describe what is actually happening on the level of the brain and how these habits develop over time and how powerful they become and how they actually do like power and they want to retain it. And they're going to try very hard to retain it. Now, there's another angle to this regression that we haven't covered yet, and that is, you could also call this a reason for why regression tends to happen. And it's what I am going to start calling, or at least I'm introducing this term now. We'll see if it sticks. I'm calling this the cruise control fallacy. So it's exactly what it sounds like. If you're driving a car, you speed up to 60 miles an hour, and then you assume that your car has cruise control. You can just hit the button and you're just going to stay going 60 miles an hour. The problem is the cars we're driving as we start our journey to fluency, they're like the base models, of the Toyota Corollas, in the mid 2000s, the cheapest, most base model, and they don't have cruise control. And what happens then is you take your foot off the gas because you think, oh, I got all the way up to 60. Things are great. I'm speaking better. This is awesome. You let your foot off the gas expecting to coast, but then all of a sudden you slow down and you aren't making any progress anymore. In fact, you could say that that's regression now. You're in that regressive phase. So it's what I call the cruise control fallacy. So this especially happens when you're like 2 months or 3 months into a program or 3 months into a practice routine of some kind, and you're working on your skills, you're very dedicated, but then you're like, but things are going better. I'm not stuttering as much. I talked to the bartender yesterday and actually went pretty damn smooth. That was awesome. And then what do? You're like, well, I can become a little complacent. I don't need to practice as much. I can sleep in a little bit, maybe not even sleeping in, because that's often not even what gets in the way. It's usually just other things throughout your day that just box it out, right? But we need to be aware of this fallacy. It's the cruise control fallacy. Your car, at least for the first few months that you're driving, very, very likely does not have a cruise control. So you're going to have to keep working. You're going to have to keep practicing, especially when things start to get better. That's when you really want to practice, because that's when you can make extraordinary gains, extraordinary leaps in your growth. And so don't let go of the gas pedal. Once you're a few months in, once you cross like a year, 2 years, now during this time you can probably start to narrow down the time you're actually spending. You probably don't have to spend an hour a day for a full year, but whatever that looks like, you are going to want to keep practicing and keep pursuing the next step of growth. You're going to want to maintain that momentum, because if you don't, the roots probably aren't deep enough. Again, you just don't have cruise control on your car yet. You might be able to get there. I feel like I have a cruise control that works almost. Like it works most of the time. I still do a little bit of maintenance work in my own personal daily routine after multiple years now of having high levels of fluency. And I've gone through stages where I haven't, but I would always feel like I would start to regress a little bit, not in a terrible way, but I was like in the way that I didn't like. And so I started to be a bit more intentional about, okay, it's not a ton of time, it's just a few minutes, but I always try to make sure that I do that routine for maintenance and to make sure I can keep that foot on the gas. Okay? So that is step 4, regression. So what do we have so far? We got one more step to go. We're going to bring all of this home. So we got hope, we got doubt, perseverance, regression, and now we come to renewal. So this is the phase where you renew your commitment, you renew your dedication, you get back into the routine, you get back into the program. You maybe email your coach or your therapist that you stopped showing up for, right? You reconnect with them to try to get back into the flow of things. You do all of that with that updated vision, that newfound energy. That is renewal. You need it. And there's one, I think, really liberating aspect to this renewal phase on your path to healing that does not get talked about enough. And it has to do with your brain and body remembering your peaks. It remembers the growth that you've gotten. So when you regress, so if you're growing and you've reached this level here, but then you regress and you come back down, yes, you've regressed, but your brain, your body remembers what it was like up here, which means it's very akin to muscle memory, where if you get jacked, ripped once, and then you stop working out for a while, and then you come back, you're going to be able to recapture and get those muscle gains back way more quickly the second time around than the first. That's exactly how it is with stuttering. That's exactly how it works. So even after you've regressed, you can get back to that peak and even beyond it then through this renewal process way more quickly than it took you to reach that point initially. And that's such an important thing to remember. Your brain doesn't forget. Your body doesn't forget what it was like to have those higher levels of fluency. And you can get back there quicker than you think. So those are the 5 steps. Now, I want to make a quick point here about this isn't a pattern that only happens one time. As I have, you will continue to go in and out of these different phases in different ways as you continue on your journey to healing and on your journey to mastery. So you'll have days where you just feel really hopeful. You'll have days where you feel like you've regressed a bit, and then you renew. And then you'll have days where you don't really want to practice, but you persevere. And so this is not a linear thing that you only go through this process once and then that's it. Like, no, you really move between all of these steps. But you do so at higher and higher base levels. So the baseline moves up, right? The threshold keeps moving up to where maybe you were playing around these 5 phases down here, but now you're playing with the 5 phases up here. And that's a very, very big difference. So these steps, these phases that you go through, they're all a part of this beautiful process of rewiring the brain. And it's such a privilege to be able to do this. And I know, stuttering is really annoying. And I'm not going to say that for everyone it's a blessing in disguise, but for the majority of people who stutter, it really can be a beautiful blessing in disguise. Why? Because it gives you the opportunity to prove to yourself that you can transform something about you. And if you can do that once with stuttering and your speech, that gives you the belief that you can also do that in other areas of your life. And for that reason alone, stuttering can become an incredible blessing in disguise. So keep that in the back of your mind. So I want to get to one more thing. I'm going to get a little bit sentimental at the end here. But before I do that, I want to let you know about my free Stop Stuttering workshop. So if you enjoyed the video so far, and if this makes sense to you, if this hits home, and you want to take that next step, then go implement, go start this process. Go watch my free Stop Stuttering workshop. Link is in the description. It gives you the daily routine. It gives you an hour-long, in-depth lesson of helping you understand what to actually do, how to actually go about this process of healing, of overcoming your stutter. It's all there in the Stop Stuttering workshop. Again, I'll leave a link in the description below. It's 100% free, so be sure to check that out before you leave. Okay. One more thing, and then I'll let you go. Let's talk a little bit about scars. As we know, there's no wound that doesn't leave a scar. And in much the same way, you will still carry the scar from stuttering, even after you've experienced a lot of the healing. And also, healing from stuttering does not imply that you'll be 100% cured or 100% fluent, or that you'll never again have a bad day where you regress a little bit. But it does imply that the road in front of you will be open. It does imply that you will be able to speak your mind. And it does imply that you will be free. But again, there's no wound without a scar. So I'm not suggesting, and I don't even know that it would be completely desirable to be completely removed from all memories or feelings or hunches or sensing a little bit of those old stuttering patterns that try to sneak back in. I think all of this helps us to embrace what it means to be a human being, which is overcoming obstacles, which is when life gets difficult, we find a way. And it's just one of the most beautiful experiences, I would say even sublime experiences you will ever have, is going through this journey of healing from those stuttering wounds. It's such an amazing thing that it's not going to hit you all at once. You'll get little hits of those. You might have those smaller sublime moments as you go along, as you experience those healings as you go. But then eventually it might hit you. You might wake up one morning and all of a sudden it hits you. Instead of the ton of bricks of pain and trauma and stress about stuttering, all of a sudden it hits you that, oh, that little flicker of light that I saw when I was all the way back in my little hope phase, when I couldn't imagine or visualize much, but I had a little bit of hope. And all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, after this long process, now I'm here staring at this bright sun that's in front of me. And that is such an incredible thing to experience. And I want you to have that. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. Healing takes time. But again, I hope that you follow through on this. I want you to do it. Take it from somebody who's gone through all of these steps multiple times. I've gone through all of these phases, and I've come out on the other side with so much gratitude that I did that, because it just opened up so many other doors in my life that just would not have been as open, just wouldn't have been as fulfilling. Those doors maybe wouldn't even have been unlocked if I hadn't first gone through this tedious struggle, this volatility of good day, bad day, and struggling, getting depressed about stuttering, but then having a better day, and this back and forth and up and down. But then if you persevere, you stick through all those ups and downs, you get to the end, and you realize that was so worth it. That was so worth every second of my time. So that's where I'm going to leave you today, my friend. Thank you so much for watching. Again, go watch the Stop Stuttering workshop. Link is in the description. It's also at speakyourmindmethod.com. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.